I want you to listen to an interview done by Alex Witt on MSNBC, that awful place where they've hired Al Sharpton. I mean, that MSNBC ought to be shut down just on general principle for having somebody like Al Sharpton as an anchor on that network. But anyway, she interviewed Stephanie Grisham, one of the White House press secretaries, and I want you to listen because you can get a lesson about the inner workings of the White House. But she's going to say some things about Trump that she said to the January 6th committee, and she probably said a whole lot worse. But I thought you might want to hear this today. I'm going to speed right through it because I got to get to Sabbath's new tune. Mr. Engineer, drop it real quick.
Joining me right now is Stephanie Grisham, former White House press secretary and communications director for President Trump, also chief of staff to First Lady Melania Trump. She is also the author of I'll Take Your Questions Now, What I Saw at the Trump White House. Stephanie, big welcome to you. I'm awfully glad to have you here. Lots to get to. First of all, let's play part of an interview. It happened just this morning with Alyssa Farah Griffin, who described the shape of things to come. Here it is.
I think you're going to see the anatomy of the big lie begin to unfold when you see more text messages come out of people around Trump who knew the election fraud was a total myth. They were simply humoring him and privately saying, yeah, we can't keep spreading this craziness. I think that chips away at Trump's credibility, and I also think it really gets to him.
What's your take on what she said?
I could not agree with Alyssa more. I think that exactly what she said is correct. I mean, this is how the Trump White House worked. We would talk to each other, go around him, text each other, call each other, try to get him to stop, some of his many antics. And I think that as that becomes more obvious, as Alyssa said, that it's going to really break things down, especially when you see people like Sean Hannity or the last press secretary, Kayleigh, conspiring against him. You even see Mark Meadows talking and saying, I love this plan, I love that plan, which is clearly a plan that the president wouldn't have wanted. So I couldn't agree with Alyssa more.
Can you give me a little more specifics on who the we would be in those group texts when you would just, others have categorized them as being, this is just crazy, that there's no way we could be doing what Donald Trump would want us to do.
Yeah, I would say, broadly speaking, senior staff. And I have to say broadly because there was so many senior staff. It was, constantly a rolling list of people. So, the chief of staff at the time, whoever that may have been, whether it was Reince or General Kelly or Mick, and then, of course, Mark Meadows, anybody in the senior roles would talk to each other. I constantly would talk to Dan Scavino or Ivanka. You've got Jared, Kellyanne, certainly. And we would try to think of ways that we could, gently walk things back or go around the president so that, we could try to help not have things be a little so chaotic.
Was that just weird for you? You were working in the White House. Was it like you were having to deal with an alternate reality? I mean, having to humor the president?
That is actually a great question. I have never been asked that, but no is my quick answer because I had been around it for so long. You get so entrenched in it and it just becomes a way of living. So at the time, no, this was just how we did things. Now that I've stepped back, certainly, and I've kind of gotten to real life, yes, it's crazy to think about, but at the time, no, this is just how things operated, and you wit about it every day. You had so many fires to put out. I don't think we could stop and think a lot of times.
So we know that you recently cooperated with the January 6th committee, and according to The Guardian, you told the select committee that Trump hosted secret meetings in the White House residence in those days before January 6th. And look, I know there are some things you can't say, but can you at least confirm this? And is there anything you can tell us about what you told the committee, what you knew, what you did see?
Sure. I talked broadly. I spoke to the committee about how things worked behind the scenes. In my role as chief of staff to Melania Trump, I was often alerted when any meetings would take place in the residence, most of the time, so I could just let her know that there would be people in her home. Now, when Mark Meadows came, that flow of information stopped. And so I would get that information from other areas, say the Usher's office, who would be responsible for waiting and escorting people into the residence. So I heard about many of the meetings that were taking place post-election, but pre-January 6th up in the residence, oftentimes from them.
Let me pick up on that, because it's my understanding, based on testimony that we believe you gave, that the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, was the one who scheduled these meetings off the books They were private, off the books. So he knew they were happening. Of course, the 1-6 committee has tried to get answers from him, tried to interview, and he is stonewalled at this point. Also, you mentioned the White House usher, and that is a name that is not really publicly out there so much. This is Timothy Harleth. Tell me who Timothy Harleth is, beyond just knowing that I believe he was close to Melania Trump for a long time.
Well, yes, you'd have to be in that role. I mean, the chief usher does everything for the family personally in the residence. So it's a very respected role, and that has to be very discreet in a lot of ways. So they were very close, just by essence of that role. Mm-hmm. He came from Trump org. Actually, I was one of the ones to interview with him. He worked at the Trump Hotel before he was hired on as chief usher. And he did a great job. He was very discreet for that family, I will say that. And so anything going through, as I said, the usher's office, for anything, with the residents is what he would be in control of.
Yeah, no, you're totally clear on this. So I just want to ask one question, though. So the usher is going to have to literally wave somebody through, right? Somebody comes in and then they have to pass through the usher who says, go on upstairs to the residence. So he's going to know who
Correct.
went.
Now, yeah. So anybody could have technically wave a person through. So let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, Mark Meadows waved somebody in. The usher, though, would usually greet them and take them upstairs to the residence. You don't just walk into the residence without an escort.
So given your insight, and you give Timothy Harleth's name to the committee, was it your impression that they were aware of him, or did you think that you were giving them information that, okay, here's another avenue you can pursue?
I couldn't get a read on that, to be honest with you. I don't know what they knew and what they didn't. I think that was probably by design, so I have no idea.
Okay. We do know that the committee is getting White House documents now from the National Archives, and that's because the Supreme Court refused to side with Donald Trump and block their release. These documents, Stephanie, in your esteem, do you think they would include things like activity logs, who's coming and going, or even notes that would be taken from these secret meetings in the residence?
I hope so. I don't know that there would be notes taken up in the residence. I'm not sure, how those meetings happened. So I don't know about notes there, but certainly visitors logs, I would hope, would be released. And then certainly on January 6th, you've got to always remember that when the president makes a movement, whether it's in the White House or outside of the White House, there are documents put together to show literally minute by minute where he's walking, who is greeting him, how long he's supposed to stand there, who would be introducing him. So with January 6th, I think that there are probably documents like that could be helpful. And I hope that those are in the batches of things that were released.
So you know that the committee has asked Ivanka Trump for a voluntary interview. Give me your sense of how close of an advisor she was to her father and how significant any testimony from her could potentially be.
Well, I think just as his daughter, it would be very, very significant. But I think what's so important is that she was also a senior advisor, as was Jared. And so, they signed up for that. They signed up to work in the White House as senior advisors. They didn't take a paycheck. Yes, I know. But I think that because of that, because they were serving the country in that capacity, it's their duty, or her duty right now, to talk to the committee. I think it would be absolutely huge because she, as we know, was in the Oval Office having meetings with the president, and also went in there a couple of times to try to tell him to, to speak to people and have them leave the Capitol and be peaceful. She was often, I've always said this, she was often kind of the voice of reason. She and Melania both, to be honest. And so I think hearing from her would be significant, but I don't think that will ever happen. I think she, just like everybody else, will stonewall and push this off. I think they're all hoping that they can push this off until 2022, and then hopefully they're hoping that Republicans will take over and the whole thing will be disbanded.
Okay, so you think that a voluntary interview won't happen, and if anything would happen, it may have to take other steps to get her to talk to the 1-6 committee. How about you, though? Because you resigned on January 6th from the Trump administration. Yeah. You were Melania's chief of staff on that day. Why did you leave, Stephanie? What was there a last straw for you? Was it witnessing that day, or had you already said, this is going to be the day I leave, January 6th?
No, I mean, I write about this in my book. I tried to leave many, many times, if I'm being honest, in the last probably 8 months to a year of the White House. But that day was difficult for me because, as I said, in the Trump White House, we were putting out fires every day. Nothing seemed crazy, but that day I just had a really bad feeling. And then watching what was happening on TV and watching all the Trump flags and the MAGA hats and, all of his supporters doing what they were doing, I couldn't handle it. And I wrote to Mrs. Trump. I sent her a text and said, do you want to put some kind of a tweet out just saying be peaceful, that it's everybody's right to speak their mind, but be peaceful. And she wrote back the word no, just no. And that moment it is when I couldn't. I resigned. I sat for a minute and then I sent an email and I resigned. I just couldn't be a part of it. I used to tell myself because I worked for her, I was a little bit better and that's why it was okay to stay. But when she wouldn't do anything on that horrible day, I couldn't stand there and be there anymore.
So you just painted a picture of watching television and seeing the MAGA hats and the Trump flags. I'm curious, how many televisions, as you made your way through the White House, had the insurrection underway, live, being broadcast on those televisions? And what was the reaction of White House staffers? Were they agape? They're like, oh my goodness? Or were they just saying, oh, it's fake news? Or how did people react to it?
I don't know the answer to that. The East Wing was telecommuting because of COVID at the time. So I was quite literally at home watching TV. I know that Mrs. Trump was in the residence and she was having a new carpet photographed. But I also knew that there would be a TV on up there. So I knew that she was aware of what was going on. I heard stories, as we all have, of what was going on in the dining room off of the Oval Office. And that was that the president was watching TV and rewinding it and commenting about how they're fighters and that they're very tough. But I was at home, so I was alone on that day watching it.
No, I appreciate the candor with that. Last question, Stephanie. Donald Trump, as you know, has been teasing the potential of a 2024 White House run. Do you expect he will actually do it? And if so, what kind of a threat would a second Donald Trump term pose?
I don't know. I thought at first there was no way he was going to run. And then I've changed my mind to think he was going to run. And knowing the man like I do, it's weird for me to not know. I believe that he's waiting to see what happens in the 22 midterms. I think that if a lot of his more radical candidates that he's backing get into Congress, he'll run because he'll feel empowered to do so. I do believe that if he is our next president again, all the guardrails will be off. He won't have to worry about running for re-election. When I was in the Trump White House, there was a common saying that senior staff would say. Jared Kushner was one of them. And it was always like, well, that's a second term project, meaning we're going to wait and do the more crazy draconian things until the second term. I also believe wholeheartedly it will be a revenge tour. I think anybody and everybody who spoke out against him, he'll be seeking revenge against. I don't think that he will be looking at it as what's best for our country anymore. I think it'll be what's best for him and how do I get back at all the people who dared to defy me.
Notwithstanding whether or not you are for Trump or against Trump, I find this a very compelling, along with a very informative interview. And on the Alex Witt, I take my hat off to you for the series of questions, and to Stephanie Grisham for your very fluid way of explaining things and looking at things that we all know is true. We all know that the things that you were saying were true. There was nothing hyperbole going on in that interview. I thought it was a good interview. That's why I clipped it. And I thought I'd bring it to you.